My name is Trevor Harrison. I am director of Parkland Institute. If I can ask you, please take some seats here and make yourselves comfortable for what is going to be a fabulous evening, as per usual at our conferences. This is the 23rd annual fall conference of Parkland Institute. The title this year of the conference is Populism and Its Discontents, and I can't think of a more relevant kind of topic to be dealing with this year and what's been going on around us. Before I begin here this evening and introduce you to a number of fine guests, I want to acknowledge that the University of Alberta, where we're gathering this weekend, is located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples. As we gather to look at some of the forces impacting our communities and how we engage with each other, it is critical that our deliberations this weekend be grounded in the land on which we meet and the history and the lives of its peoples. To that end, I would now like to invite Lewis Cardinal to come up and say a few words. Lewis Cardinal is Woodland Cree from the Sucker Creek Cree First Nation in northern Alberta. He is owner of Cardinal Strategic Communications, specializing in Indigenous education, governance, and communications, and was a founding board member of Racism Free Edmonton and of Alberta Aboriginal Arts. He is past vice president of the John Humphrey Centre for Peace and Human Rights, founder of the Indigenous Peoples Arts and Culture Coalition, and co-chair of the Aboriginal Commission on Human Rights and Justice. A lifelong activist and advocate for Indigenous rights and reconciliation, Lewis has received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Inspire Award for Public Service, the Alberta Centennial Medal, and the Distinguished Alumni Award from MacEwan University. Lewis, please come forward. I'd like to give you this token. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, I hope my sharing will be as long as the introduction. Thank you so much, Trevor. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you all for being here. I will take this tobacco, which is a traditional offering, and I will offer it in ceremony for all of you that are here. And as you deliberate over the weekend and you share with each other and you strengthen your relationships with each other, the work that you're doing is very important. So the sacredness of this tobacco is to honor that and to respect that for the work that you'll do this weekend. Now, I want to share a couple things with you to ponder about during your deliberations this weekend. One is treaty, and the other is Canada. But when we talk about treaty, and thank you for the wonderful acknowledgement that we're on Treaty 6 territory, because that's an important message that we have today to share with between the settlers and ourselves. But let's always remember that the treaty is a two-way street. So I greet you as brothers and sisters and welcome you to this great gathering place that we call Edmonton. And Edmonton, as you know, has been a great gathering place for thousands of years, and we are continuing the spirit of that gathering where we come and exchange ideas and knowledge and spirit with each other. So very much alive in this conference that's held every year, so I thank you for that. We have to remember that treaty is more than a legal relationship. Treaty is a very sacred act. It is something that Indigenous people have been doing for thousands of years. When we make treaty with another nation, when we make treaty through ceremony, we adopt each other. Our nation adopts your nation, because then through that you become family. And the golden rule is you do not make war on your family, but you come to stand beside them through their times of difficulty and through their times of joy. The treaty is something that isn't just between our leadership, between government to government or nation to nation. It is a relationship between you and I, you, my brother, you, my sister. Internalize that. Recognize that we are all brothers and sisters, and we are all sitting in a great circle of life and looking into the future and putting our heads and our hearts together so we can build something better for our descendants to come. The second point I want to share with you is the name of our country, Canada. Canada comes from the Algonquian/Cree word, kanatan. And kanatan, translated in English, means a clean, pure, and sacred place. Clean, pure, and sacredness are intermingled. They're one and the same thing. Kanatan. So when Cartier and when Hudson were coming up the rivers, they would ask the Iroquois and the Huron, the people that they met, and said, "What do you call this place?" And they said, Kanatan. This is clean and pure and sacred place. But when you remove the N from Kanatan, it becomes Kanata. And Kanata then becomes a verb. It means to make pure, clean, and sacred. In order for us Canadians, or Canadians, if you want to call us that, in order to achieve that Kanatan, we have to ensure that our relationships are in order. But relationship begins with yourself, by placing yourself into order. Are you living in balance with who you are? The mind, the body, the spirit, the emotions. Are those things in balance with you? And then when you reach out to the ones that you love, the ones who are immediately around you, how are your relationships with them? Are you maintaining those relationships? And then how are you maintaining your relationships with your extended family, your clan, your community, your nation, the cosmos, your ancestors? So when we see the name Canada, it is actually touching us gently on the shoulder and asking that question. What are you doing to maintain your relationships so that we can all attain Kanatan? Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much, Louis. Very, very inspirational words and very fitting for the times we're in. Now, I know that all of you are here to listen to Mark Kingwell, and certainly not to me. And that happy moment is going to come very soon. But first, I want to also thank some generous sponsors that have made this conference possible. The Alberta Federation of Labour, Canadian Union of Public Employees, Civic Service Union Local 52, the Health Sciences Association of Alberta, Non-Academic Staff Association at the U of A, United Nurses of Alberta, University of Alberta's Faculty of Arts, Wordsworth Irvine Socialist Fellowship Endowment. Big hand around to all those sponsors. Thank you. We also have a number of media sponsors, and I want to thank them also for their generous support. Alberta Views Magazine, CJSR Radio Edmonton, and also a thank you to a big one to Earth's General Store and Audrey's Books for being ticket vendors for the conference. And perhaps most importantly of all, I want to thank all the many volunteers who are helping us with this conference and make it happen. Parkland really can't do enough without the volunteers, and every year their job has been just fabulous. So big round of applause again for them. And finally, I want to thank and invite up here to give us just a few words, Dr. Leslie Cormack, Dean of Arts at the U of A. Leslie has been one of Parkland's greatest supporters. We value her support tremendously, and she's been a good friend of Parkland over many years. So, Leslie, please.
Good evening, everyone. I always am in this odd position of being not the person you want to hear from, but the person who stands between you and the person you want to hear from. So I'll try and be brief. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the Faculty of Arts to Parkland Institute's 23rd Fall Conference. Every year, as many of you know, the Parkland Institute organizes this conference of thought-provoking speakers and informed debate. And the amazing program that they've lined up for this weekend is no exception to this tradition. I have to say, we're living in uncertain times. I don't know if any of the rest of you, as you drove here, were listening to the recap of the impeachment hearings, but it just feels like I'm living in this surreal moment of not even knowing how people can say things out loud and not feel embarrassed. There we go, thank you. And so it feels like in every place we are, whether it is the news or our daily lives or whatever we're doing, that we are living in a period of incredible uncertainty. And in some ways, the only thing we can be assured of is that our political landscape is tumultuous and divisive, which is a sad thing to say because I think that it makes it very difficult to deal with the things that we actually need to be dealing with as fires burn and Venice is flooding and a number of other things one could imagine. So how do we make the case that continued investment in knowledge and learning is in fact an investment in the public good? Because it's only by talking about ideas and working them out together that we actually can move forward. We start, I think, by being good citizens ourselves, both individually and collectively, by being positively engaged in the creation of a future that's inclusive, diverse, equitable, environmentally sound, and one where ideas flourish and society can progress. Here at the university, we reaffirm our fundamental commitment to intellectual integrity, freedom of inquiry and expression, and the equality and dignity of all persons. The topic of today's conference, Populism and Its Discontents, couldn't be timelier, or I think more crucial to our understanding of the fundamental challenges that we're facing around the world. As we know, Canada has not been immune to this populist wave, even if the Gilets jaunes are not all here in force. Thankfully, I think we have some of the best minds at work, both at the Parkland Institute and more largely in the Faculty of Arts in the University of Alberta. Through its events, publications, and media reports, Parkland, I think, is a good citizen, a good public citizen, providing government, academics, and the general public with information they need to take responsible and informed decisions as they wade through the quagmires of the 21st century. Indeed, Parkland Institute has been a source of pride for the Faculty of Arts for 23 years, especially for the way that it engages the public and enables informed debates that democracies require. The many people who are involved as members, donors, researchers, and board members, you all know who you are, who attend events as you are doing tonight, are a testament, I think, to the value people place on the Parkland's critical role in enriching the public discourse in Alberta and beyond. I think part of the reason that the Institute has been so well respected and influential in both political and non-political circles is because it's not just an academic body. It's collaborative and interdisciplinary. It walks the walk that we all talk about the community academic interface. It actually happens in real time in this room and in this institute. It welcomes the input and participation of students, of community leaders, business representatives in an unfailing effort to bring critical discourse to public policy discourse in this province. In 2016, as many of you know, the University of Alberta's Board of Governors unanimously approved a strategic plan that was called For the Public Good. The Parkland Institute, I would argue, is the very embodiment of that mandate. Without question, we're all better informed and more engaged citizens because of the work that Parkland has done and does do every day in its dedication to democratic debate in this country. I certainly want to thank Trevor Harrison and the whole team that has made this weekend possible. As Trevor says, it takes an army to make a conference work, and I know there's some committed, a small number of committed people who work on it all year round, and a larger group that come to the table as we get ready. Thank you all. It would not happen without you. Finally, to any Parkland donors in the audience tonight, I certainly want to offer you our gratitude. It is because of you that this institute continues its important work. There's no question, and there's been no time more important than today. And so I know you're all eager to hear Dr. Kingwell. So I'll hand the microphone back to Trevor so that he can introduce him. So thank you, enjoy the conference, and I look forward to the debate.
And yes, you will hear from Mark, but again, a short interruption here. Just to build on what Leslie just said just now, truly, Parkland, we're very proud of what we've done, but we never forget that we can't do it without the support of people in the community, people like all of you who are here this evening. All of the publications you see that we bring out, all of the reports, the op-eds, the presentations, the workshops, the teaching that we do on a regular basis, none of that is possible without the support of people in the community. And so I would encourage you to please continue to support us. There are pledge forms available at the Parkland table where you can make a donation, and otherwise please consider also being on the monthly giving plan. For those of you who have not registered yet for the conference but are interested in coming to individual sessions, tickets will be available at the door. You can also still register for the full conference, and if you've looked at the program, you can tell it's going to be absolutely fabulous from top to bottom. And we'll even take the price of your ticket for tonight's session off from the cost of the full registration, should you choose to do so. If you have any other questions, please contact either myself or Ricardo or one of the other volunteers here. And if they can't answer the question, we'll find some way to get you that information. Finally, the moment you've been waiting for. Philosopher, critic, and public intellectual Mark Kingwell was born in Toronto in 1963. And we had a great conversation on the way in, by the way. Is he a boomer or not? He definitely believes he is not, or he's a very late boomer. Okay. Born in Toronto in 1963 and grew up on Air Force bases across Canada before attending the University of Toronto, BA 1985. After studying at the University of Edinburgh, Masters of Litt in 1987, and Yale University, Master's of Philosophy 1989, PhD 1991, he returned to the University of Toronto, where he is now Professor of Philosophy and Fellow of Trinity College. Mark has held visiting posts at Cambridge University, the University of California at Berkeley, the University of Chicago, and the City University of New York, where he was a Weissman Distinguished Visiting Professor of Humanities. He has been, since 2001, a contributing editor of Harper's magazine in New York. His most recent works include the linked essay collections Unruly Voices, 2012, and Measure Yourself Against the Earth, 2015, and a book about baseball, Fail Better, 2017. His most recent works are Nach der Arbeit, After Work, 2018, and a book investigating the politics of boredom, Wish I Were Here, Boredom and the Interface, 2019. Some of us with long memories will remember Mark's talk at the 2001 Parkland Fall Conference, Reclaiming Democracy, Transnationalism Crisis, and the Task Ahead. We're thrilled to have him back here again. Thank you and welcome, Mark Kingwell.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you all. I've been up since 5 a.m. Eastern time, so I was thinking about going and taking a nap during some of that, but I'm glad I didn't, because it's a great conference that has more beginnings than Beethoven's Ninth Symphony has endings, because it's all about inclusion. And I will also say it's really nice to be back here in Vancouver. Oh, sorry. The weather was a little confusing on the way over. Seriously, it's great to be back in Edmonton. It's been a while. One of my favorite cities in Canada, and always a pleasure to revisit and to be part of Parkland again. So I'm not going to do a lot more preliminary stuff, but can we get my presentation up there? We've got to go back. There you go. And will this? It's not advancing. Why don't I just do it at the keyboard? Yeah, just do it. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to go over here and use the whole console and call in some drone strikes and things like that. What I was thinking about when Trevor asked me to be part of this conference, and I was thinking about populism, populism is not technically one of my academic specialties, but as the dean mentioned, I think in these days, all of us have become perforce experts in the kind of everyday realities of populist politics. And what I thought I would do with this opening keynote is relate some of those insights and maybe distressing experiences many of us have had to some thoughts that I've been developing about the nature of technology and our relationship to it. And so hence the title of the talk. And I'll explain as I go what I mean by the interface. It's in the subtitle of the last book that Trevor mentioned, the book about boredom called Wish I Were Here. To my mind, the interface is not just any particular platform or system or program, but anything that mediates between self and world. And so we've allowed the notion of interface to become heavily technologized, but there are interfaces everywhere. A doorway is an interface. It's a threshold between inside and outside. A conversation is an interface. So there are interfaces of this kind of organic or natural kind that I think we tend to neglect, perhaps because of our constant immersion in technology, at least in the most developed parts of the world. So I'm going to try to relate populism to that concept. I will ask you to turn off your phones. And it's not just the usual thing that, ringtones are annoying. I actually don't mind ringtones. My students' phones go off all the time in lectures. There are those hockey coaches, who will stop a press conference if some reporter's phone goes off. It's like, you get out of here. No, I don't care about the ringtone so much, but I would rather, this is just a suggestion, you don't have to agree, but I would rather you not live tweet this. Let's be here now and experience this together. And if you want to tweet later, go nuts. But I think one of the things that we've learned about technology from McLuhan and before him, Martin Heidegger, is that they are extensions. They push out. They don't pull in. And what I think is great about when human bodies are in the same room, it's like going to live theater instead of having some kind of screen experience, right? You're there with other people. And that's really important. And I think, so that's my suggestion. Like I said, people are probably live tweeting right now, Kingwell says turn off my phone. I can't stop you, but that's just my suggestion. So, the problem. I mean, I think some of what I'm going to say in the next few minutes is very obvious. I hope some of it is less obvious, and maybe some of it's even a little bit radical. But the obvious part is the problem. What is the problem of populism? The problem of populism is that there are too many of us. There are between 7 and 8 billion people on the planet, and each one of those human persons is filled with desire. And desires are expensive. They consume things. They consume resources, they consume time, they consume attention, and they have many great things too. But we have seen the effects of that kind of consumption and depletion as the population of this overheated planet has grown and grown. And so populist politics, it seems to me, has to first of all acknowledge that it comes out of population. It comes out of the idea that somehow the group has a certain kind of significance that has to be acknowledged. So, what happens in populist politics? Well, we all know. We get into this kind of bifurcation or division. And it's not just enough to be right on your own terms. The other has to be wrong. And it seems to me that this kind of thinking, this binary thinking, is at the root of all populism, especially, though, in its toxic forms. So I'm going to try to unpack what I think are the specific kinds of toxic forms of populism. Building walls, right? So I'm going to separate out those who I don't want to be part of my population, because I think, what? I think they're a threat to my population's way of life, to my desires, and their rampant desires, as I see them, are going to undermine my ability to meet my own. And I don't have to tell you that when we build these walls, the wall isn't just a wall. Right? A wall is an interface. It is a conceptual barrier as well as a physical one, because it says us versus them. And the them is often someone from somewhere else, someone who doesn't look like me, someone who believes things that I don't. That is the basis of this toxic form of populism. So, I mean, this is the sort of, I don't know, Game of Thrones version of the wall. Well, actually, the wall in Game of Thrones is much bigger, but you know, don't want to be too nerdy about it. But this is the actual wall, you know? Build that wall, build that wall. To my mind, that was a much more distressing Trumpian slogan even than lock her up, which was certainly distressing enough. The idea that you would build a physical wall to keep people out of a country because you didn't like what might happen if they came in. So these kinds of things are part of what happens when we set up these barriers. So switching now to, again, well-known examples from the European theater, when people who are immiserated try to find a better life somewhere else, they're kept out. And some of them will die on those boats. Or I didn't want to show you the image because I find it too disturbing, but that little boy who died on the beach as they try to come in. Right? So that's not a physical wall, but the wall is still there because the threshold is the territory that keeps somebody out who wishes to come in. Now here's, you could marshal a lot of different sorts of facts, but this is one that I think is worth noting. Again, probably obvious. So since 1980 now to 16, which is already 3 years out, the rise of populist politics has been continuous and fairly drastic, certainly very consistent across territories. So in various countries in Europe, I don't have to tell you which ones, you know all this, but in the United States and even in our own homegrown versions here in Canada. So, pick your demon at this point. That's the unfortunate position that we find ourselves in. Who is the populist, the toxic populist that we find most objectionable? There are too many choices. And by the way, I'll just add a footnote, and we can talk about this later. One of the things that political theorists are talking about now is how municipal politics and regional politics might be the pushback on populist nationalist movements. So that when we realize that the power might lie more in cities than in nations, which, as we should recall, on the 19th century notion, dominant notion of nationhood, is a landmass defended at the borders by force. Right? If you start pushing back at the local level, you might have a chance against some of these populist nationalist movements. But there's still things like this. So this is Charlottesville. I realized when I started growing out my hair that my hair looked like a little bit fashy, like these guys. So I'm now thinking, I'm not sure what to do, but maybe go back to just, I don't know, cutting it all off or but that looks fashy too. It's a problem for haircuts. But I don't mean to make light at all about what happened in Charlottesville, and not to mention what happened, but then President Trump's response. Good people on both sides. Right? That both sidesism is itself a kind of toxic ideology that underwrites a nationalist populist idea. I just wanted to show you this as another kind of footnote. Of course, there's left-wing populism too, populism that I would endorse. So this is from Occupy Wall Street, and it's a very fuzzy image because it's a screen grab, as you can see from Rachel Maddow's show. If I can just do a little plug, I wrote that book. But then you may recall what happened to the Occupy Library, which was a free circulation library, when the police broke up the occupation of Zuccotti Park. They threw all this stuff in the garbage. I wrote a column at the time, and I said, they didn't even bother to burn it, because book burning is too much effort. Like, just put it in the trash. So anyway, that was our little brief moment. I should say I co-wrote it with my friend Josh. So anyway, we were there. So there is left-wing populism as well as right-wing populism, there's no doubt. And we have to be clear about what we mean by populism. Do we mean simply popular movements that garner a lot of popular support? Do we mean those movements, though, that seem to gather together elements of nationalism and sometimes racism into an ideological brew? And I think it's the latter kind of thing that most of us are worried about now, because we see the divisive effects it has on national politics pretty much everywhere. And we certainly see the divisive and sometimes evil effects it has on the free movement of people around the globe. So, you don't have to go far. Again, I'm not going to show you disturbing images, but you don't have to go far to see images of detention centers along the Mexican-American border that would be declared cruel by the ASPCA. Right? No, it's true. I mean, you wouldn't treat a dog that badly. You wouldn't. And yet, we treat humans that badly. So that's all, I think, the obvious. So now let me try to isolate what I think are the main tactics of this kind of toxic right-wing nationalist populism. I want to be very clear that that's what I'm talking about. And then I'm going to outline some solutions or possible solutions. So what are the tactics? Well, the first one is blame attribution. Right? And most of these tactics, by the way, are rhetorical. But rhetoric becomes politics. Right? I mean, Aristotle said this 2.5 millennia ago. That's how they taught every politician from his time pretty much to now. So the first is blame attribution. And what I mean by that is my, quote, errors are your fault. Right? So if you think I'm in error, that's a mistake that you're making. Right? And Mr. Trump, by the way, is an instinctive master of this particular tactic. Right? He's never wrong. It's impossible for him to be wrong. It's like one of those axiomatic things that we teach people in logic class, the things that can't possibly be wrong. Well, next time it'll be A equals A and Donald Trump. Right? So, blame attribution. There he is. Got to be careful not to meet meanness with meanness, but I couldn't resist that one. Quote, bad manners. Right? So this is a very close concern to me because I started my academic career writing about civility as a political virtue and how civil dialogue actually was the reliable route to justice. And even at the time, this was in the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, many people pushed back and they said, oh, civility, that's never going to work. But now what I think is really interesting is that you get these rival versions of civility. So people who don't like what you're saying accuse you of having bad manners, right? So, shut up, he explained. Which is, by the way, the title of a wonderful book by my colleague John Metcalf, the literary critic. So you shut the other person down by accusing them of not being civil, no matter how civilly phrased their objections are, because objections themselves are somehow bad manners. Right? Just shut up. Third tactic, candid, so-called candid speech. So these are all scare quotes, by the way, or what we call scare quotes. That's me. Get used to it. You know? I'm just like that. I'm just a terrible person. Get used to it. You know? I say stupid, incoherent, and inflammatory things. Get used to it. You know? There's a great scene in a Woody Allen film, Midnight in Paris, where one of the characters who's newlywed has had an affair with another guy, and she says to her, I guess they're engaged, not married, her fiance, Owen Wilson. It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, I slept with him. Get over it. It's like, no. So this is a kind of blanket get out of jail free card, because you can just say, well, you knew I was like that, so why are you objecting now? You know? And by the way, you can escalate this, as once again, we've seen with Mr. Trump. So you can start with the Hollywood Access tape, which then gets forgotten because the next outrage is slightly more outrageous, and so on and so on and so on. It's an up ladder. And yeah, I like me. Deployment of cliche baffle-gabbing tweets. I mean, this is probably the most obvious of these tactics. This still notorious tweet of Kofefe, I don't know, I guess that's how you say it. Mr. Trump doesn't drink, so this can't be the result of intoxication. I don't know what it's the result of. But we all know about the tweeting. And the tweeting actually is not just an incidental issue. It's a serious structural problem in the nature of democratic politics in the United States, and I would say around the world. In fact, I'm going to go on to suggest in a moment that the very presence of Twitter has been a toxic element in political discourse. That's not a novel claim at all, but I think it's something that we should keep hammering, not on Twitter, because it's really important to make the point that when you reduce things to 140 or 280 characters, and the most powerful person in one jurisdiction is tweeting, 20 to 30 times a day sometimes? He was tweeting during the testimony of the former Ukrainian ambassador, attacking her while she was testifying. That should be somehow not possible, and yet it happened. And then, the schoolyard tactic. I know you are, but what am I? Right? Which is it's sometimes called negative politics, but it's really playground politics, right? I know you are, but what am I? And the idea is, of course, to just turn the tables and negate the position or the point made by somebody else. All right. So, one more. So the labeling, right? And again, this will be familiar. You are unpatriotic, anti-American, a never-Trumper, not aligned with Canadian values. That may not be so popular here, but anyway. Or you are you people. Right? And there's been a lot of ink spilled about this since the incident on Hockey Night in Canada. But my favorite comment so far was, if you're inclined to start a rant with the phrase "you people," stop. Right? Rewind and think again about exactly what you want to argue. Because whenever you say "you people," you have already stepped over the line. Right? That is already a demonization tactic, just in that two-word phrase. And Mr. Cherry, I think, in his own tortured mind, probably knows that. He said he's not going to apologize. He meant what he said. I believe him. I think he did mean what he said. I think it's indefensible and racist, but I believe he meant it. All right, so now let me say something about how I see technology specifically falling into and abetting this kind of toxic right-wing nationalist populism. The first thing is the rise of ad hominem argument over any other kind of argument. And again, we teach this in Logic 101. Ad hominem arguments are fallacious. Right? When somebody makes an argument that attacks the person making it, that doesn't have any validity. And yet, I believe now that ad hominem arguments are... Sorry, should I have put a trigger warning on that? There's not safe for work. It's Friday night in Edmonton. But attacking the person instead of their argument. And I'll give you a quick personal example. You probably all have examples of your own. I wrote a column in the Globe and Mail where I publish about once a month about Mr. Trudeau's brown-face, blackface escapades. And for some reason, this seemed to trigger a lot of responses. It seemed mostly from angry actual boomers, because I'm not one. Old guys, the okay boomer types who just couldn't get over it, couldn't digest the outrage that I was attacking our youthful prime minister for these hijinks, these escapades. But they didn't reply to my arguments. They attacked me personally. And every single one of them, every single one of the critical comments was a personal attack. And I thought, that's really interesting. Well, in calmer moments, I thought that. In less calm moments, my spouse has to take my keyboard away from me because, no, I never replied to that stuff. But why do people now think that attacking the person who makes an argument is the acceptable way to respond to an argument? How about coming up with a counter argument or an objection to that position? I mean, the person making the argument is in some ways the least important part of an argument. And yet, I think this is now the dominant form, and I think it's because of online culture that this has come to be the case. And so we are immersed now in fallacy because none of these ad hominem arguments are valid, and yet they're everywhere. They are the standard operating procedure for a lot of so-called discourse. Now, I've used this slide a few times, so those of you who took Psych 100 will recognize Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, revised for 2019. So we start with, the physiological needs. We move up to, if we're lucky, self-actualization, if we can satisfy the lower levels. But none of it is possible without an internet connection. And I plead guilty. I was saying to Trevor earlier, I'm not on social media. I don't tweet or go on Facebook, but I'm on email all the time. Academics love email. We do. I'm an insomniac, so I get up in the middle of the night and I check my email. I check my email and I watch the sports highlights. That's what I do. I drink ginger tea. That's the only healthy part of that. But yeah, so Wi-Fi becomes this kind of indispensable aspect of our everyday lives. Again, in the developed parts of the world where people have personal computers and access to the internet. What that means is we are constantly in this kind of battle between, if you don't know these, here's what they mean. You only live once, YOLO, versus fear of missing out, FOMO. And what's interesting, and the way this graphic shows it gets it right, because in some ways they seem to come from the same place. Right? You only live once is that feeling that, I just, again, personal example, I just got an invitation to go to a fishing camp in Labrador next summer. It's very expensive. But I'm thinking, well, when will I ever get a chance to do that again? I'm in my mid-50s. I gotta go. It took me about a day to get there, but once I got there, it seemed obvious, right? You only live once. Fear of missing out, though, is more neurotic and anxious. And so it can look the same because it's like, well, I got to do that. But fear of missing out is going to generate pathologies like upgrade anxiety. Got to have 4G, got to have 5G, got to have 6G, right? Got to get a new phone every year, new TV, right? I must be online all the time, must tweet constantly, right? That's part of FOMO. And FOMO is toxic, it seems to me. It's the toxic version of YOLO, if you want to, put it in very stark terms. But technology abets it because it makes us not live in the moment. And this is one of my favorite images. This is Mr. Bieber giving it was an unscheduled impromptu conference at the Danforth Music Hall in Toronto. And all of these people who were lucky enough to walk by that night got to go in and see him. Well, lucky. If you're a believer, then I've seen him once. It was pretty good. But what I love about this is nobody there is actually at the concert, right? They're all taking those pictures so that they can post them on Instagram later and say they were at the concert. But nobody's experiencing the concert except through that interface. Now you could say, and a lot of people, especially my students, would say, well, that is an experience. That's a kind of experience I want to have. But I just want to say, before we completely surrender to that immersion, what about putting your phone away and listening to the music and being there with your friends? Isn't that the point of going to a concert? It used to be. I don't know. Now I do sound like a boomer, don't I? Okay. All right. Well, I should have warned you again about this. Book plug. So this is my new book, Boredom and the Interface, and Wish I Were Here. So Wish I Were Here is a play on, what people used to write on postcards, Wish You Were Here, which they never really did. It was kind of an FU on a postcard. I'm here and you're not. So we played in this book with the notion of postcards and postcards as an interface, as a kind of social medium before there was an internet, before there were computers. Because people used to send hundreds of postcards. And they would make their own. They would take their cameras and have postcards made and send them around. And it also started with, this is just a footnote again, really. Martin Parr, the English photographer, brilliant artist, did a couple of books called Boring Postcards, which are truly boring postcards of things like 1950s living rooms and parking lots in England and stretches of motorway. And it's like, why would you ever have a postcard of that? So they're fascinating. But of course, once you start looking at them, they're not boring anymore, right? They take on a fascination because they capture this mundane reality of life as we live it. And all of these interfaces, a motorway is an interface, a parking lot is an interface, a living room is one, and so on. So, wish I were here. And then to get that idea of, what we used to say in the 70s, and be here now, right? Can you be here now? It's not so easy to live in the moment, but that's what boredom, it seems to me, the deep lesson of boredom is that technology is constantly taking you out of the moment. It's constantly extending your consciousness in ways that are overstimulated. Right? Boredom looks like understimulation, but actually is overstimulation. Often, not always. There's genuine suffering in boredom, people in prison, people who are immiserated, that's different. I'm talking about the kind of, I call it neoliberal boredom, where there's constant, well, yeah, it is. Constant profit-based overstimulation of your desire to get you to go to whatever the next thing is, right? The next level of the computer game, the next scroll on the Facebook page, etc. All right. So Facebook and Twitter, it's easy to demonize these, and it's easy to use the language of addiction when it comes to them. So in my book, I'm very careful to sort of step around the language of addiction, because genuine addiction, as studied by medical professionals and psychologists, is distinct, it seems to me, from these kinds of social media and technological attachments or dependencies, but they do have some qualities in common. And, people talk about video game addiction, but the phone addiction, it seems to me, is the one that's most significant, because it's the one that, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or not, it's the one you carry around with you every day. Right? How many people here have a smartphone? Oh, yeah. So I'm going to show you my phone. That's my phone. And I only gave in to even having a phone because my spouse was complaining that I never told her when I was coming home after work. And when I did, I was borrowing somebody else's phone. So that meant I was like that person who hangs out on the street corner and bums cigarettes from people who bought a pack. It's like, come on, dude, just go buy a pack of cigarettes. Yeah. So I'm going to take a picture of you guys. Awesome, you look great. So the fact that we all have smartphones means that we've cyborgized ourselves, right? We've become cyborgs. We are totally enmeshed in the technological world. The actual device is not the interface, right? The interface is all the things that you do with the device, or all the things that you depend upon. Oh, somebody sent me a text. Was that it? I hope that wasn't one of you guys, because I'm turning this off now. Nobody sends me texts. I had this thing for like 6 months, didn't even know I could get text. Anyway, the phone is technology that's now actually attached to our bodies, right? So that's the cyborg part, right? You can be a cyborg in lots of ways. You can wear eyeglasses or have a pacemaker or something like that. But phones, even though they're not internal to the body, are still attached to the body, right? And that is, of course, a double-edged sword, like all things. But let's consider some endgame possibilities. What happens if we continue along this immersion of trend with respect to technology? And so many of you may have seen this film, beautiful film by Pixar called WallE. Yeah, it is a great film, isn't it? It's really a love story between two robots. It's like the Romeo and Juliet of robots, Yeah, except they're different generations of robots, so that's kind of interesting too. Anyway, the whole point of the satire is that the humans have left planet Earth to be ravaged environmentally, and have set up this spaceship where all they ever do is eat, drink, consume, entertain themselves, etc. Right? And that is a kind of endgame of this kind of culture that we seem to be building with technology. What is the point of all of this satisfaction of desire, or apparent satisfaction? Because I don't think it's real satisfaction in the philosophical sense. So some other touchstones, again, this may be familiar to you, the so-called singularity, which is the point, the imaginary point at which, I don't think intellect is quite right here, by the way, or intelligence. But you might say something like algorithmic robustness or algorithmic power. Is there a point at which non-human versions of that algorithmic power actually outstrip the human versions? And the notion of the singularity, by the way, which was mooted by a philosopher quite a long time ago, is that once there is such a device or a program, you don't need to develop more, because that program can just replicate itself. So that's the single part of the singularity. And at that point, that shoots up. Right? And so then the question for us becomes, is there a way for us to meld or merge our own kinds of desires and existence with non-human kinds of algorithmic existence. I don't know that this timeline, that suggests, so if that's the distance from 1950 to 2000, that suggests that it's about maybe 2060. That seems very unrealistic to me. But anyway, it could be happening at some future point. What could also be happening is, this is from Spike Jonze's beautiful film called Her. Has anybody seen it? Some people? Joaquin Phoenix plays a lonely, he writes greeting cards, and he gets what they call an OS, which was an artificial consciousness that he carries around with a camera in his pocket. It's voiced by Scarlett Johansson. And what's fascinating about this, he falls in love with this OS, and but at a certain point, oh, this is maybe a spoiler, so plug your ears if you haven't seen the film and want to. I see people plugging their ears. I'm not gonna do it. There are some revelations. Let me put it that way. They're really interesting, but I'm not gonna spoil it for you. And then this, I'm gonna see if this video works. No. See, I knew it wouldn't. Yeah, the interface is messed up. I wanted to show you this video because it's very funny. This is a comedy program called Man Seeking Woman, and the conceit of this ad for it is that this hapless guy is shown in a series of scenes. So here he is eating cereal on his couch. There's another one when he's in his cubicle at his boring office job. There's another one when he's in the bathroom. And every like half second, he goes flying off to the left and smashing into the wall. And then the cutaway at the end of the ad is two women looking at their phone and laughing and swiping left and swiping left and swiping left. And the last one is he smashes into a food truck on the street, and his buddy says, "Yeah, it happens to the best of us." And there's nothing wrong with dating apps if they work for you, but the idea that you can sort of scroll through a bunch of humans, actual humans, and just go, nope, 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 nope. Oh, maybe, that's what they're making fun of. So I'm sorry that video didn't work, but you get the idea. All right. Now, more structural things, and I'm going to not take too much more time. So I've talked about technology after talking about the tactics and the problem. But the basic reality, it seems to me, that fuels toxic nationalist, populist movements and ideologies is a feeling of alienation. And we hear this over and over again. And I stress feeling because it's not always clear that this is correct. Often it's just a relative condition. Right? So the idea that somehow I'm not doing as well as quickly as somebody else in a different group, maybe with a different skin color, say. Right? Or I'm not doing as well as I hoped I would be doing. I'm not doing as well as my parents. Right? These are realities. But whether that's actually alienation is debatable. What's not debatable is the background conditions. So we live in a drastically unequal world when it comes to wealth, drastically. Probably nothing since maybe the Middle Ages comes close, and even then we don't know for sure. But if you imagine the feudal order where a royal or noble family controlled probably something like 90% of the available resources and wealth. That's pretty close to what we have now when you look at the numbers. And here are some numbers for you. These stats are a little bit out of date, but they're still relevant. So let's start at the bottom. Right? These are American data. So, but you can transpose them. What Americans would like the distribution of wealth to be. And you can see what they would like it to be is pretty egalitarian, right? I mean, they recognize that there are going to be, probably more people who have less of the wealth, right? But they want it to be pretty even, right? Then, in the middle, what they think it is, right? And what they think it is pretty bad, actually, right? But it's not nearly as bad as what it actually is, right? Where this tiny, or sorry, I'm doing it the wrong way. This huge yellow bar is the top 20% of the population, and that's how much of the wealth that they control, right? In fact, if you refine this, top 20 is actually too crude a measure, because you got to get down to top 10, top 5, or top 1. You know, that's what Occupy was. We are the 99%. If you get to the top 1, this gets even uglier at the top. All right, so a part of what's interesting about these findings is that people are deluded about the state of wealth distribution in their own worlds. Right? They think it's much less worse than it actually is. And it's trending. Right? So check this out. The bottom percentage of, bottom 90% of families, the red graph, 0.1% of families is the white. And you can see the negative trend scope there, right? The bottom 90% are getting less and less, and the 0.1 are getting more and more. You know, they say the rich get richer. It's really, really true. It's really true. And partly this is regulatory capture, you know, the ability to control political bodies, Congress, or I don't think these figures would be nearly as bad in Canada. At least I hope not. Maybe I'm deluded, but I hope not. But partly it is things like not having sufficiently aggressive inheritance tax, right? So people can bequeath wealth. They can pool wealth over generations. And the complaint is always something like, well, you can't tax the money twice, you know? You taxed it when I earned it. You can't tax it when I give it to somebody. So you're not taxing the money. You're taxing the transaction. And this is what people forget. This is Econ 101. Taxes are not about the actual dollars. They're about the transaction. And that should be taxed when it comes to inheritance and bequest, at least in my opinion. All right. Sorry, gotta keep going here. Again, some more figures. You can see that the top 400 now, this is 1950 to 2018, has controlled more and more. You can find tons of this stuff online. So let me conclude with some possible solutions. And I say possible because I really don't know. But taxation is certainly one, right? I love this because it's like straight out of Monopoly. Right, so I mean, I'm not going to go through all of it, but this is actually very interesting. Mr. Thurston dies, his wealth is redistributed. No, it's not. He puts it into a dynasty trust, right? And it can grow untaxed. This is the other thing. It's as it's passed along through generations, it can accumulate and still be untaxed. Right? That's what a dynasty trust does. Right? So that kind of tax is an obvious place to start with a redistributive measure. Right? So some of the new state laws, however, are trending in the opposite direction so that the trust doesn't ever have to end. Right? So this is a very old stat, but up to $100 billion tied up in dynasty trusts. Right. Obvious point. The amount you owe, yeah. Why is it that Mr. Trump won't release his tax returns? Just a question. Scaffolding. Scaffolding is something that social scientists talk about. Not that scaffold, but I wanted to put this image in because they tore that down, and it used to be something I loved to see on the Brooklyn side of the East River. even though I, not really a Jehovah's Witness, but anyway. Scaffolding is the idea that you can use various kinds of measures to nudge people's behavior. So various economists and legal thinkers and social thinkers have talked about how we might have measures like this to, in effect, help us make better decisions. Now, many critics find this paternalistic, but the evidence is very clear. We make bad decisions all the time. Irrational decisions that could be made more rational with small measures. So to give you a quick example of a scaffold, if you have a fast food restaurant that doesn't have trays, people order less food because they have to carry it away in a bag instead of loading up a tray. And that seems ridiculous, but it's actually true. It's demonstrated, right? If you, if you prevent, what do they call it, upsizing, right? So if you go to the cinema and they say, for 40 cents more, you can get twice as much sugary pop, If you don't have that, people drink less pop, and so on. Those are small examples, but you can make this as elaborate as you can imagine. And there are lots of interesting possibilities in the research on so-called nudging. So, I get the paternalism objection, but I think it's very important to think, at least in an open-minded way, about what scaffolding might be able to do with helping us with our technological immersion. So some people self-scaffold. There are programs, for example, that will automatically turn off your phone or your computer, time you out. Right, there are a whole bunch of those. I talk about them in my Boredom book. So it's a bit like, I think the original example must be Odysseus tying himself to the mast or stuffing his ears with wax so that the sirens don't crash his ship, right? That's self-scaffolding. You put a timeout program on your computer so that you won't, indulge your addiction or dependency for too long. It's, yeah. And, maybe the most basic and the most important is empathy. Recognizing that the others, even though there's so many of them, every single person on the planet has their hopes and dreams and is capable of experiencing pain and suffering, just like we are. And it's true that you can't experience anybody else's pain. That's one of the strange realities of mortal life, right? President Clinton said, "I feel your pain," but nobody feels anybody else's pain. What you can feel is pain at seeing the pain of another or the suffering of another. Right? And that's what Mr. Smith meant. He actually used the word sympathy, not empathy, but what he was talking about is what we nowadays would call empathy. It's the ability to imagine the suffering of another person, another entity. And the birds still crap on his head in Edinburgh. So this might be the way through our technological immersion, because I don't think we can go back. Right? I'm not suggesting that. But to go through might be to imagine forms of empathy that take our current realities, interfaces, and make them better, and make them less toxic, and maybe, therefore, give us the ability to recognize the otherness of the other in such a way that toxic nationalist populism doesn't gain a foothold in anybody's heart or mind. Because it's the otherness of the other that's at the center of all this. To see somebody who's not you, not like you, and still recognize that they're an entity worth taking seriously, worth empathizing with, worth welcoming. And then that puts our own identities into question. Because now we have to think about who we are. Right? And as long as there have been, Montaigne is probably the best modern thinker about this. He said, when you encounter somebody radically different, it makes you different. Because you can't just go on the way you have been going on. You have to rethink who you are and what you are And are you or are you not reducible to something, to a barcode? What makes you you? Oh, that works. That's great. Whenever I raise these questions with my students, that's how they react. It's like, what do you mean? I have to rethink my identity. It's hard enough for me to get out of bed in the morning. It's like, yeah, I know. It's hard for everybody. So there you go. It's a beaker. You're not reducible to your shopping preferences either, even though corporations would love that to be the case, because they're gathering your data all the time and triangulating it and selling it back to you. So, I'm a philosopher, so I think all of this ultimately comes down to thinking harder about who we are and what we are and where we're going and who else might be there. And I thank you for your attention. Sure, yeah, if there's time, yeah.
So, yes, we have some time here. What I'm going to ask people to do is maybe what we'll do is take like 3 questions at a time, then Mark can answer them, and then we'll take another round of 3 until everybody's exhausted and we leave here at 2 in the morning. Okay, so first question, I'll try to flag down people. So if you want to put your hand up. 1 in front here. Do we have a second? Second back there. So, and 3 just here then.
Hello. Okay, I was just wondering if you know of any statistics about how the concept of upward mobility, the American dream, anyone can be president, that sort of thinking has changed among economic groups over time.
Okay.
Just back here.
Hi, thanks for just a quick question. Why didn't we take away Twitter?
Sorry, say that again?
Why didn't we take away Twitter from Hitler and Mussolini? Another question. Well, that's not why we have fascism rising. It's not because of social media. The other thing is Don Cherry was racist, a-hole, a long time ago, and social media got him canceled. So it's not all bad.
And the third one just down here, in about 3 levels up there. Yeah.
Regarding your comment on the ad hominem attacks, wasn't that largely pioneered decades before?
Sorry, you kicked out there.
By the deconstructionists?
And the culture warriors, their attacks on authors, not on their work itself, but on the fact that they're these dead white men, or that sort of thing that was common a few decades ago. It almost seems to me like that presaged the ad hominem attacks that we have now from the right on people to discredit their arguments.
Okay, so in turn, there are statistics about the American dream, so-called, or upward mobility, maybe more accurately. I don't have any at my fingertips, but I've read a couple of studies that suggest it's drastically flattened, if not trending down. Which is to say, if you measure things like expected and realized prosperity of children as against their parents. Right, so if that's what we mean by social mobility, is the idea that children will do better than their parents economically and maybe socially, then that is trending at least flat and maybe trending down. The other thing I would say about it is the American dream itself, that phrase, that's an ideological phrase, right? That is a myth in the Roland Barthes sense. It is a kind of dominant narrative that's intended to keep people believing in certain things that are not true. So for example, capital gains tax. So I talked about taxation on inheritance, but every once in a while, we have a pretty steep capital gains tax in Canada, but in the US, the capital gains tax is quite low, one of the lowest in the world. And whenever the issue comes up for voters, there are all kinds of voters who are opposed to capital gains tax increases, even though it is demonstrably the case that they will never declare a capital gain in their lives. And so then you think, if you're a social philosopher, you think, well, what the hell is that? You know, they're voting against their own interest. Because if they voted to increase capital gains taxes, there would be more redistribution of wealth through programs. But the obvious answer is they believe they could be somebody who one day declares the capital gain, right? That's the ideological part of the American dream. Yeah. The second question, I honestly still don't understand the Hitler comment. Unless you're talking about how he used the radio or something, is that the point?
I think it's unfair to blame social media for the rise of fascism, because it was around a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't think I did that, so I don't have any response other than that. I didn't say it is responsible for, I said it abetted, and that is, I think, demonstrably true also. Of course, fascism predates social media. Although, I mean, the point I was suggesting when I mentioned the radio, Hitler was using the dominant social medium of his time, namely the radio. And to secondary effect, the film. So if you go and watch Triumph of the Will, that is a social medium abetting the rise of his kind of fascism. So, you know, it's not about blame. It's about trying to understand and do structural analysis. On the Don Cherry thing, you know, we hear a lot these days about cancel culture, and I think people use that as a shorthand for what used to be called political correctness. Both terms are incoherent, in my opinion. If you want to talk about specific instances, then by all means. I don't think that Don Cherry's firing was a result of social media. It was a result of people writing to the Broadcast Standards Council and to the network. They could have used the phone or email or smoke signals. It doesn't make any difference. That is not about social media, in my opinion. And then the third question was, I'm sorry, where was it?
That was the ad hominem.
Oh yeah, ad hominem. No, I don't think it has anything to do with deconstructionism or postmodernism or anything like that. Ad hominem arguments are as old as human speech. We find analysis of them in Aristotle's Rhetoric. We find them in Plato's critical analysis of discourse. And targeted by those philosophers, and that's just in the Western tradition, targeted specifically because they are invalid. There are lots of reasons that one could adduce for the current bad state of political and social discourse, but I don't think deconstructionism is one of them.
Okay, we'll take a second round. I see one hand just right over here. And I saw a second one at the back, first of all, and then I'll take this one right here then. I'll take this one first, and then we'll come back in next round.
So I'm not certain whether you still think...
Where are you?
Right here.
Okay.
I'm not certain if you still think civility is the route to justice.
Yeah,
Or is it revolution or something else?
right. Good. Thank you.
And way at the back. We can take this one first, and then we'll still take the one at the back here. So, yeah.
No. Just to summarize what you were saying and make sure that it's clear, like what you were saying. So were you suggesting that we use technology for spreading empathy, scaffolding, and taxation, like the results that you were, the solutions that you proposed? Is that what you meant by saying how we can conceal technology with?
Move through, not pull back. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then at the back.
Could you say something about the phenomenon, in my view anyway, that there was a migration of the ideal of free speech from the left, when I think of the free speech in the 60s, and it's now seemed to moved over to the right in the sense that it's represented by the right of Jordan Peterson platform. So I suppose the other part of that question is the deplatforming phenomenon, which I'm not sure is the same thing as the I have an opinion, fuck you, that you already covered. But the migration, I guess I'm interested in from left to right, what seems to be the essentially the same value.
Right. Thank you. So first of all, in the civility question, I guess I would like to believe that it's still related to justice. I still think civility is a virtue of citizens. And by the way, I should say, I mean, this is a very, very truncated version of the argument I made in my first book and a bunch of articles after. Civility is not politeness or niceness or even, what somebody else tells you is good behavior. Civility is the willingness to listen to other people's arguments and phrase your own arguments in a way that is contributing to something shared, right? A shared political discourse. But I will also say that I became very cynical at a certain point writing about that topic, and I reversed polarity on my argument. So instead of arguing for civility in what we call an optative way, which is like, I wish this were the case, right? I started arguing against incivility. And so I have this piece that whose title is Fuck You and Other Salutations. And what it argues is that incivility is what we call a collective action problem. It's a race to the bottom. And we see this over and over again. I wrote that a long time ago. But what happens in a race to the bottom is that when somebody perceives potential advantage by being uncivil, in this case, they create new incentives, perverse incentives for other people to be even more uncivil, right? And then that in turn does the same thing. So hence the race, right? So once you understand that as a collective action problem, you don't really have to argue that civility is necessarily the route to justice. You just have to try and show that incivility is self-defeating. Because at the end of the day, nobody has any political discourse or public discourse anymore, because it's been completely destroyed by this perverse set of incentives. So I made those arguments. What was striking to me was a few years ago, partly as a result of political events, the positive accounts of civility were once more back in academic fashion. So it was striking that when I published my first book in 1995, it won a prize and it got reviewed and that was all great. But then, so whatever it was, like 30 years later, or 35 years later, everybody's writing about civility again and making all the same arguments that I did. So in a way, I think that's good, because it means that we do recognize that this is an important value. It's not like it's the royal road to justice. That's certainly true. But I think, as I said, I think it's an important part of understanding the notion of being a good citizen. So on the free speech question, yeah, it's... and I should just maybe say a quick word about this, that I sometimes joke and say that I'm a neo-Luddite because I'm not on social media and, I showed you my phone and so on. And this is a fountain pen, if anybody's keeping score. But I do believe that with McLuhan, that technology, especially mediated technology, so interfaces, are essential to everyday life. And the best thing we can do is reflect critically on their possibilities, positive and negative. And one thing that's also worth adding, by the way, and this is a more Heideggerian point, people often say things like, oh, technologies are neutral. They can be used this way or they can be used that way. That's bogus thinking, because technologies have tendencies. So one of my favorite examples, this is from my friend Douglas Rushkoff, who writes a lot about technology and media. So you can use a handgun as a paperweight, but that's not what it's for, right? What it's for is killing people. That's what a handgun is for. You can use a pillow to suffocate somebody, but that's not what it's for, right? It's for laying your head on when you go to sleep at night. Right? So those are very simple examples, but every technology has tendencies built into it. And one of the things that I discuss in the Boredom book is what's now called ethical design. So that people who are devising algorithms and platforms, they actually have, some of them have a code that they subscribe to where they will not deliberately embed addictive elements into the platform or the app. Right? Because lots of designers do, because that's profitable. So anyway, I think pushing forward, pushing through, we can't recede. And then finally, on the free speech question, I don't know. It's, I was saying to Trevor when we were driving in from the airport, because of the free speech codes that the government of Ontario is now wanting to impose on all universities, and I know it's going to happen here, or already has happened. Yeah. I've been getting a lot of media requests to talk about free speech on campus, and I have to tell you my quick Jordan Peterson story. So, well, there's two. Well, there's more than two, but these are the two I'm going to tell you. The first one is, I got an email from some guy in Australia, and I guess Peterson was down there touring his book, and this guy said, I've been trying to get in touch with Jordan Peterson. And I thought, first of all, Jordan Peterson loves to be gotten in touch with. How did you fail? Because everybody, he'll answer any email anytime. And he said, can you write to him? Because I want to paint his portrait. And I thought, why are you asking me to do that for you? So you can paint his portrait. The other quick story is, I know I haven't answered your question yet. The other quick story is I met a friend for a drink, and he said he just heard the news that Peterson has a sequel to 12 Rules for Life. And he said to me, so can you guess what it's called? And I thought for a moment, 12 Rules for Death. And he shook his head and laughed. He said, you're such a philosopher. No, it's 12 more rules for life. Like, well, if there were 24, why didn't you just put all 24 in the first book? 12 more rules for life. Come on. Anyway, it's true that the rhetoric of freedom of expression has, I don't want to say co-opted, because it's not like anybody had a monopoly on that notion. But it does seem to have been put into rhetorical play by certain kinds of conservative forces. Yeah, I would agree with that. And the left, whatever that means, has maybe not been so great at responding to that deployment of the freedom of expression notion. It's tough because many thinkers of a certain sort on the left want to push specific activist agendas, and I think that's great for the most part, but it does leave the flank open on the right, to that kind of counterattack concerning freedom of expression. It looks like you're shutting people down. And I'm an old-fashioned liberal when it comes to this, I'm a left-leaning liberal in lots of ways, but when it comes to this, I believe in that old adage that sunshine is the best disinfectant, Mill said it best, and on Liberty, there's a marketplace of ideas, and the good ones should drive out the bad ones. We'll short the stocks on the ones that aren't working, and we'll reinvest in the ones that are. And it's a long game, like any market. So that's kind of where I stand on that.
We'll certainly take another three, and I know there was the first one right down in front here. And then we'll take the woman in pink, just over here is the second one. And is there another hand here? And we'll take Fred in front here is the third one.
That was you.
Yeah, no, I think it was this gentleman here, actually. He had his hand up last time, and we missed him. I didn't want to miss him again.
Well, I'm just wondering, you're talking about the market. It works. Technology. The marketplace of ideas, how...
I know, what's wrong with them?
How optimistic are you that the market of ideas, the good ideas will prevail?
Okay. And back over here. Yeah.
You got one.
It's not working. Oh, now it is. Woo. Okay. So I was just wondering, since you said that you're not on social media and everything, there is sort of a breakdown in the description of ethical coding at the moment, because I don't know if you're familiar with the whole Mark Zuckerberg thing and coding Facebook and the algorithm to show people what they want, but that was also part of the ethical coding debate, where he thought that what he was doing was ethical coding. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that and how that word has been sort of muddled around with.
Yep.
Okay, and then just back over here. Just in front.
There's hands up everywhere.
Our mics are proving that all technologies have not been perfected yet.
Yes.
It's kind of a similar question to the last one, Mark. The etymology of a notion. In this case, the notion is the notion of fact. And as we've seen, Kellyanne Conway, for example, offering to us that there is a universe of alternative fact. So I'd like to hear your responses to this evolving etymology of the term.
Thank you. Again, in turn, I wouldn't say I'm very optimistic, but I am modestly optimistic about I just think, if you think about evolutionary adaptability, right, humans have proven to be very adaptable in the interests of their own survival. And when toxic ideas prove maladaptive, they fall out. Right? The people forget this, but the original notion of meme, which we now mean, we're used to mean, some humorous thing with a cat and a caption. Dawkins's notion of meme in The Selfish Gene is imitated behavior that is either adaptive or maladaptive. And what he tried to single out there was the fact that humans are, we all know this, humans are highly imitative creatures. And when we see behaviors, he sometimes calls them evolutionary good tricks, then we repeat them. And the more good tricks there are, the better off we are in terms of our survival. Now, there's a separate question that I won't bore you with because you all know it all too well. Our survival may be not a good thing for our environment. But in terms of our survival, we find ways to adapt. We're good at that. We're very good at that. And imitating good evolutionary tricks is part of what we do. That's what memes mean. And Dawkins suggests that a meme is transmitted almost like a gene. A gene's transmitted physically. A meme is transmitted through culture in the broadest sense, visual, oral, written, and so on. And it's easy to see how it works. I mean, again, a simple example that I like to use, everybody knows how Wayne Gretzky used to celebrate a goal. Right? And even if you never saw Wayne Gretzky do that, you know, because every 11 or 12-year-old kid did exactly the same thing when he or she scored a goal. Right? Why? Because they saw Gretzky do it, and he was the great one, right? So that's a meme, right? That's what a meme is. And think about that the next time somebody uses meme in the wrong, well, it's too late, that ship has sailed, but yeah, it's way too late. So that's why I'm modestly optimistic, because I think we have ways of adapting. And frankly, if you want to get very, very scary about it, if we do continue to destroy the planet, we will probably, or some subset of us will probably adapt to that somehow, right? We'll go off-world, or we will drastically reduce the population. I mean, think about Malthus. I don't know if anybody reads Malthus anymore, but when he wrote about how populations increase in geometric proportion, but resources increase only in arithmetic proportion, what he was talking about was exactly this, right? That you're gonna overtax your environment with people. But evolution has a way of correcting for that. Right? It might be quite violent, but I'm optimistic. Second, the critical coding. Yeah, I wrote a column actually in the Globe a couple of weeks ago about artificial intelligence and ethics, and so that wasn't specifically about Zuckerberg and Facebook, but this is part of the hollow argument about. Also, he invokes the freedom of expression line. The hollow defense of rapacious corporate interest under the sign of public good. And I don't think anybody is a more vivid example of that than he is. And what he's managed to do, of course, is not only co-opt a whole bunch of extremely talented young people, but he's also, I mentioned before, regulatory capture. He's managed to get a whole bunch of policymakers to fall in line and let him keep doing it and expand on it. Right? So again, this is not just about Facebook, but you think about Amazon, right? Jeff Bezos is another one of these. Although to give Jeff Bezos credit, at least he doesn't indulge this bullshit rhetoric about freedom. Right? He's very open. He said, "I just want to take over the world. You know, I just want all markets to be mine." But when you buy something on Amazon, you immediately have given your data away, and you'll know that because the next time you open any other website, there's going to be a targeted ad for something that you didn't even necessarily buy, but just looked at. And I heard this from my stepdaughter, who uses her smartphone a lot. She was getting ads on her laptop, which she believed, and I believe her, were based on conversations she had on her smartphone. Right, texts that she sent, text conversations. Right, so if she mentioned something, somebody grabbed that data point and put it into an algorithm. And those algorithms are very powerful, and they're self-correcting, right? They're reiterative algorithms. So they gather data, they go back and reinterpret the data, and back and back and back. So ethical coding, I mean, I like to believe there's such a thing, and I think there are real coders who are interested in the ethics of this. Just as there are, computer scientists. I work with some on computer science and AI projects who are deeply interested in the ethical implications of what they do. But it's all too easy when there's profit in play. That's why we need universities, by the way. So we don't have to think about profit all the time. Yeah. Okay, and last question, fact. I mean, this has been much discussed, but one line that always keeps coming back to me, there's a great philosopher and historian of philosophy called Alistair MacIntyre, and he has a line in one of his books that goes, facts like wigs for gentlemen were an 18th century invention. And what he meant by that was that the notion of the individual factum, the isolated true or false thing, really was a specific kind of emergent property of the scientific revolution. Before that, there was a much more organic notion of how truth worked. Now we're into this, so-called post-truth moment and alternative facts and so on, and we've become unmoored. So instead of going back to a more organic idea or maintaining our faith in the adage, you're entitled to your own opinion but not your own facts, we have made it harder and harder to isolate what is true from what is false. And you can see this, by the way, in the impeachment hearings, which have already been mentioned, where people will say things like, well, you can't independently verify that because you weren't there, so it's hearsay. It's like, yeah, well, I haven't been to the moon either, but I'm pretty sure it's there, you know? And that's not hearsay. And in fact, there is no hearsay in play in these congressional hearings. That's a legal term that belongs in a courtroom, and these aren't courtrooms. Anyway, don't get me started. I've been up for a long time. Should we call it?
I think we're going to call it. Mark, I do want to thank you on behalf of everyone for a fabulous. I think you've really set off the rest of the weekend, the conference. I will say actually one thing. A couple of years back, my wife and my daughter convinced me that I should give up my flip phone. It didn't even take pictures. And they gave me this incredibly expensive phone that I still use as a flip phone because they somehow thought they'd actually get hold of me if I had it. They still can't get hold of me. So I think I'm going to go back to the flip phone and save all those costs. Anyway, again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
If you find yourself inspired by this evening, and I'm quite sure you do, and want to come to the rest of the conference, it's still not too late, as I indicated earlier, to register. Your registration will be discounted, the cost of tonight's ticket. Please visit the table in the lobby to register or buy tickets. Coffee and goodies will be on at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. And then we'll kick off the day at 9 a.m. sharp with Emily Laxer and her talk about the intersection between populism and religion. In closing, we continue to providing events like this and doing the research we do. We need your support. There will be a few volunteers at the registration table to take your completed pledge forms. Again, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Take care.